Alright, so if you're looking to buy coilovers for your car, you may have noticed the mention of divorced or separate versus true rear coilovers and the option for these two coilovers. And in this video, I'm going to explain to you the difference between divorced and true rear coilovers and what the pros and cons of both of them are, so you know what you actually need to buy for your car. Now, the first thing you need to know about this is not for every car on the market. This is basically only for cars that have a separate rear spring and shock setup from factory. So for example, things like the Nissan 350Z, 370Z I believe has it as well. So that makes the G35 and G37 Infinities. A lot of BMWs like E30s, E36, E46, I believe actually pretty much all the BMW 3 Series have it, and a couple other cars as well. And so for some of these cars, coilover manufacturers will make a true rear version and a divorced rear version. And then the question then is like, which one should you get? So there are pros and cons to both of them. I'm going to go into this. Basically, the divorced rears are just the OEM setup. So if you want to just put the new suspension in and not have to worry about anything and not make any difficult decisions, and you're not doing anything specific that requires a true rear, you can just go for a divorced rear and there's not going to be any issues. You're not really going to see a major difference, especially on the street, in terms of how it performs by going with a true rear. But I'm going to go into the details of that here. So I'm just going to assume that we'll consider the divorced rear the standard thing. And so what I'm going to do is give you the pros and cons of the true rear against the divorced rear. So if we go pros, this will be pros of the true rear against the divorced. So the first pro of true rear, they tend to have softer springs. And the reason for this is because with the separate spring and shock combo, what happens is, let's say this is the wheel of the car and then you got like the shock here, etc., and the arms, right? The spring is further in here, and so it has less leverage. If you consider from like the center of the car where this whole thing operates and moves, the spring is further in, and so it has to be stiffer to account for that. Versus if you have a true rear coilover, which would be like this, right? And then the spring is here, and then you've got this arm. The spring is way out here now, and it's got more leverage to work with. It's like the basic principle of torque, where if you have a longer arm, you can apply less pressure and it does the same job. So basically that allows you to run softer springs on the rear, which will then allow you to run softer springs on the front to balance the rear as well. Now, again, this is only going to be a very incremental difference, and you probably won't really even notice this on the street, but it might be like a 1-2 kg difference in spring rate between the two. So that's the first thing to be aware of. Now, the second thing to be aware of is they'll be slightly lighter. Now, again, this is only very minorly. So if you're trying to shave milliseconds off at the racetrack, then this will have an impact. But in reality, on the street, you're not going to notice the difference. Now, the reason why they're lighter is because the springs are typically a lot smaller on the true rear, so you can use like a lighter spring or even a Swift spring if you want to go even lighter. And also there will be a slightly less components to it, and so therefore it's a tiny bit lighter than a separate or divorced rear. Again, though, you're not going to feel this on the street. So unless you're really competing and racing, it's not going to make a big difference, but it's something to be aware of. Now, the next one is it's easier to adjust. Now, this is probably the biggest benefit that most people are going to have, because on the separate spring and shock, it's actually a pain in the ass to adjust them. Because what you need to do is these usually have the mount here, and then they'll have an adjuster on the spring here. And so that will adjust the height, but then you also have to adjust the damper as well. If you're, let's say you're moving this way, you have to move that way with the damper as well, so the damper matches the spring and they're in the same position. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you'll probably be either bottoming the damper out or causing it to operate too high out of its range, and you won't get the full suspension travel. So that means you got to do this two independently, and it's kind of a pain because you got to unbolt this one usually and then adjust the spring and then wind it the same and hope you got it right, bolt it back in, etc. Whereas with this one, you can just wind it up and down like a standard coilover, no problem. So most people will probably find that this is the biggest benefit to them, that you don't have to, faff around with the adjustment. Now, the next point is that in some cases they go lower. I'm just going to put lower. This is not always the case, but in some cases this setup actually does allow you to lower your car more than this setup, basically due to clearance issues with the spring and other components in there. Depends on the car model, but that's something to be aware of. If you're really trying to go low, you might want to look at the true rear for your particular car, but you're going to need to research that and see what the application is for that specific model. And now the last thing is that they use universal springs. The benefit of this is that you can change the spring rate on these and upgrade the spring to something like a Swift spring. Because true coilovers like that all basically use a universal spring that you just get the correct diameter and the correct height, and then you can put whatever you want on there. And so that allows you to do a Swift spring upgrade here, where I don't believe you can actually get Swift spring upgrades for the separate rears. I'm not 100% sure on that actually, but I don't think you can because of the way that these are uniquely shaped to fit the specific car usually. Whereas these ones you can, so you can change the spring rates, etc. So that makes that a lot easier as well. And there's one other point, which is usually these use linear springs. Actually, these will pretty much always use linear springs, whereas these, I believe, don't always use linear springs so that they can actually fit in the right place, etc. So again, that's going to be a minor difference on the street, but you might notice it, or if you're doing more performance driving, then you might actually notice that on the track. So it's just something to be aware of. But the adjustment is probably going to be the biggest plus side of a true rear. Now, there are a couple of cons, and I'm going to give you them to the true rears as well that you should be aware of. So with the cons, there's only a couple actually, but the biggest one is that you increase the chance of strut tower failure. And this one is only really a problem on some cars. Not every car has that issue. For instance, people with 350Zs and G35s and 37s run the true rears all the time, and I've not found a single instance of anybody complaining that the strut tower broke. However, on cars like BMWs, particularly E36s and E46s, and E30s on the rear as well, if you install a true rear coilover, there have actually been instances of the strut towers failing because there's more load on that particular mount, which is already known to be weak from factory, and it can have issues even with just regular stiffer springs and dampers as well. So if you are running true rears, it's a good idea to either research your particular car and see if you need to reinforce them, or get some kind of reinforcement. So for example, again on the BMWs, what you usually do is you get a plate, or either a strut tower with the plate on the top where you bolt it in, or you get these plates which BMW actually sell for some models, and you bolt them in with the top mount, and then that just helps to spread the load across the strut tower and helps to prevent it from cracking. So that's something that you need to be aware of. Make sure you double check that for your particular car, and just make sure that the strut towers can actually handle the load of the spring in that position. Otherwise, you're going to have an issue. The last thing you want is your suspension shooting out through the top, right? Now, the next one is that some cars, I'm just going to need to swap control arms. So I'm going to put control arms. So this just adds to the cost and complexity of the installation. Some cars, because they have that spring bucket, you'll have like the control arm. This is obviously a rubbish drawing, but you know, you have the spring here. You'll need to replace that arm with like an adjustable arm or like a performance arm that cuts out this spring bucket and is basically just a straight arm. And that can add to the complexity and the cost of installing the true rear. So you need to bear that in mind. It might not be just the cost of the true rear. You might have to factor in a few $100 more to get these parts as well, the control arms, and then install them too. So just bear that in mind. And the last one is that there's no big benefit typically. So like I said, unless you're tracking your car, or unless you're going to be adjusting it all the time, and that little incremental ease of adjustment is going to make a big difference, there isn't a big benefit to running a true rear versus divorce rear, especially if you're not taking motorsports competitively, you're just running on the street, occasional track day, etc. Then it's usually better to just go safe bet, just get the divorced rear, don't complicate your life for no reason, and then you'll be good to go. Whereas if you have some particular case, or you're willing to deal with the potential extra cost and these potential minor issues, then you can get the true rear and, you know, get that ease of adjustability and maybe a tiny incremental performance benefit. But that's basically all you need to know. Like I said, if you're not sure, just go with the divorced rear, play it safe, and you probably won't regret it. So that's it for this video. If you have any questions about any of this, put them in the comments below and I will answer them. Otherwise, if you're looking to get coilovers for your car, head over to nefariousracing.com. We've got a wide range of coilovers for practically every car. And if you're not sure what you need, we have forms on basically every page of the website. You can shoot us an email. We will help you select the right coilover kit for your car based on your budget, your needs and requirements, etc. So hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll catch you on the next one.